Hello.
Ramakrishna
So now we begin with the symposium. I request the speakers, the participants of this symposium, Mukta Puranik and Arpan Chaudhary, to please come forward and take your seats here. Sri Ramakrishna was described by his disciples, by Swami Vivekananda, for example, and with the one who had shown infinite moods, infinite ways to connect with God. His life was completely permeated with the divine awareness, which did not have any obstacle as such. There was nothing, just material and spiritual like separation for him. Everything was spiritual. And the various different, what we call material, they were the different forms of spiritual awareness for him. And he exhibited in his life, through his presence, through his exemplification, that a person can approach God in various different ways. And God realization is the goal of life. So we have these two wonderful speakers for the symposium, and I first request Mukta to give her speech. They say ladies first, isn't it?
ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. Good evening, everyone. I am blessed to be here today to share my thoughts about the significance of the advent of Sri Ramakrishna. Why are we talking about the significance of his advent? Why is that event considered extraordinary? I would like to mention one basic assumption or faith upon which this talk is based. Sri Ramakrishna was not an ordinary human being, but a divine incarnation. The study of his life and teachings helps spiritual seekers to march forward on their spiritual journey. Hence, this is a humble attempt to ponder upon the purpose and significance of his advent. The Sanskrit parallel of this word advent is avatarana, which literally means to come down. In every age, the divine Lord, the cause of the universe, out of infinite love and compassion, comes down or incarnates in an appropriate form. It is the manifestation of formless, attributeless divine principle in a perceptible and relatable human form. What is the need of a divine incarnation? The answer to this question can be found in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 7 and 8. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srujamyaham परित्राणाय साधूनां विनाशाय च दुष्कृतां धर्म संस्थापनार्थाय संभवामि युगे युगे. The Lord proclaims that whenever dharma declines and adharma increases, the divine incarnates for the protection of good, destruction of evil, and the re-establishment of religion, to teach humanity the forgotten truth of what dharma is and why and how it should be practiced. Now, can we validate in Sri Ramakrishna's life that he came to re-establish religion? For that, we must try to understand the socio-economic and the spiritual status of India in early 1800s. At that time, India was under British rule. Quite naturally, the society was highly influenced by the ideas of modern Western civilization. The Western civilization was heavily based on power, progress, and physical pleasures. The primary objective of human life were wealth accumulation and sense enjoyment. Modern education and science were considered the essential tools to meet those objectives. All the efforts were directed towards material progress. But one may say that there is nothing wrong in the pursuit of material progress. Why did the divine decide to intervene? To appreciate this, we must dig a little deeper. Before the influence of the West, Indian national life was based on religion and renunciation. Enjoyment was a tool to teach renunciation in order to attain liberation, the supreme goal of human life. Under the spell of modern civilization, India rejected the idea of renunciation and self-control and began to run after the worldly pleasures. The nation gave up long-standing beliefs and tried to imitate the Western practices. I would like to quote a sentence from the book The Great Master by Swami Saradananda, explaining India's situation then. Quotes, "Having thus lost the way both to enjoyment and to liberation, and yet being bent on imitating others, the nation was now buffeted by the waves of modern materialism and resembled a boat drifting in the high seas without a helmsman." Such an apt description. It was to provide this helmsman to the boat of human life for which there was the need of the advent of a divine incarnation. Out of sheer love and compassion, the divine manifested in the form of Sri Ramakrishna. He took birth in a small village near Kolkata in February 1836. He was born to bring back the awareness of the Supreme Spirit, the Supreme Truth, the Dharma, and the duty of every human being to realize this truth. There is ample evidence in the life of Sri Ramakrishna that he consistently preached to one and to all the fundamental truths. God alone exists. God can be realized in this very life, and this is the sole purpose of human life. This is the supreme dharma. He taught this very principle to Swami Vivekananda, to Girish Ghosh, to Latu Maharaj, and to a number of householder disciples, and I may say to anyone and everyone that came in contact with him. His teachings continue to influence even today's world. This teachership was to become the dominant theme of his life. Now, after understanding the need for this advent, we may wonder why the Lord chose this specific form of an illiterate, poor village man. I want to draw your attention to these three words, considering what we just discussed: illiterate, poor, and an ordinary villager. This reminds me of a story which Sri Ramakrishna narrated many times in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He mentions, if a thorn pricks you, you need another thorn to remove the first one. I think he used the thorn of illiteracy to remove the thorn of so-called education. He used the thorn of poverty to remove the thorn of wealth. And he used the thorn of utmost village-like simplicity to remove the thorn of vanity. He clearly established that none of these attributes, like education, wealth, and exceptional talent, are needed to achieve the goal of human life. The Lord chose a most ordinary human form, which is easily relatable to this age, and demonstrated that the highest goal of human life can be achieved without any superhuman qualities. To teach anyone, you must be able to speak the language of the student. The knowledge should be given in a relatable manner. Historically, the incarnations we know came in the form of kings and warriors. No records can be found about the spiritual practices undertaken by these previous divine incarnations. Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated different ways of spiritual practices in his life. He proved to the modern scientific world that the spiritual life is most scientific. He created a mold and made it available for us all to shape our lives using that mold. I would like to point out something very important here. I know I began the talk saying this talk is based upon the very basic assumption that Sri Ramakrishna is a divine incarnation. But while studying his life for our own spiritual benefits, we must accept the human aspect of this divine incarnation. Otherwise, it is very easy to miss the lessons inherent in the intense spiritual practices that he underwent. The lesson being that we must do as he did because it helped him. If we only consider his divine aspect, then we will say that it was natural for him to be absorbed in God because he was inherently divine. The spiritual struggle manifested in his life serves as a model and gives hope to the struggling spiritual aspirants. He not only showed us the path, but gave us the milestones to validate if our journey is going in the right direction. This is a very unique characteristic of this incarnation to satisfy the need of this age. Along with the scientific outlook, the modern educated world adored three virtues: liberty, equality, and fraternity or universal brotherhood. We see how Sri Ramakrishna practiced these virtues in his life and put forward an important message to this modern world that the supreme goal of human life can be achieved by one and all, irrespective of caste, creed, and gender. Each one has an equal opportunity to attain this supreme goal. He did not limit even the methods of achieving this goal. His gracious message is, as many faiths, so many paths. You will realize the Lord through any spiritual practice performed with a sincere heart. One is at liberty to practice the path of his or her choice. He did not recommend a new religion, but he established the harmony of religion by showing that all the paths lead to the same goal, tying the entire world into one universal brotherhood. He just gave a modern perspective to the eternal truths which were forgotten under the garb of materialism. Swami Vivekananda formalized his key message through his famous quote, "Each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship, or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more, or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas, or rituals or books, or temples or forms are but secondary details." The advent of Sri Ramakrishna was to re-establish the universal religion by demonstrating how a simple life, free of me and mine, filled with an intense love for God and renunciation, can achieve the supreme goal of humanity. Can we stop here by assimilating the major facts about the advent of Sri Ramakrishna? Is this intellectual analysis of his life enough for us to embark on our spiritual journey? The answer is yes. Because by trying to understand his life, we have embarked and started the great journey. But it is not enough to continue to make progress on that path. To reach the goal of this journey, The advent of Sri Ramakrishna must happen in our hearts. I will take a pause here, and I want to share one thing. When Maharaj gave me this topic, and I was thinking, like, what should I put together? So I came up with a very catchy title, and I shared that with Tushar, my husband, and Pranav, saying, I think I'm going to name my talk as Advent of Sri Ramakrishna globally and locally. but it was not received so well, so I just wanted to share.
But here it is received very well.
So, again, I would like to emphasize, to reach the goal of this journey, the advent of Sri Ramakrishna must happen in our hearts. Until then, it's like having a recipe book, but no attempt has ever been made to cook something. Will that recipe book satisfy our hunger? Similarly, after studying the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we must try to practice his teachings in the laboratory of our own lives. That would mean the advent of Sri Ramakrishna in our own heart. That advent is beyond time and space. We should not think that we are not fortunate enough as we were born much later than the physical advent of Sri Ramakrishna, or we were born in a different region. In the weekly Tuesday classes on the Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play, we are studying about the transformation in Mathur Babu's life due to his association with Sri Ramakrishna. And in one of very recent classes, Swamiji mentioned that we should not lament the fact that we are not fortunate enough to get the physical association of Sri Ramakrishna. One must believe that Sri Ramakrishna still exists in an expanded form through this organization and his teachings. Our association with those will help us in realizing Sri Ramakrishna's true nature. If we call on him with a sincere and loving heart, he will come. To feel that love, one must establish some connection. This connection can be established by coming to a place like this, or in association with holy person, where the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna are taught and followed, by reading and following his life and message, or simply connecting with the Lord as my father, brother, or guru, etc. But that is just the beginning. Most importantly, one must continue to practice with tireless efforts till this becomes an effortless way of our life. The divine descends to us using the ladder of love and compassion. Similarly, we all can try to ascend the divine using the ladder of love and devotion. Sri Ramakrishna has shown the path, but we must walk on that path. I would like to end by sharing a personal story. By the grace of God, I was born in a house where Sri Ramakrishna is worshipped. He was introduced to me by my dad as God, and I undoubtedly accepted the fact. Till almost 25 years of my life, I proudly considered myself to be a follower of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. And then, when I first visited here in 2003, I was almost boasting in front of our Swami. Oh yes, I know Thakur since my childhood. I have read his life and teachings. And he remarked, what do you know about Sri Ramakrishna? And believe me, till today, I am trying to find out that answer with my humble efforts and with the enormous grace of Lord. It is my sincere prayer at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna on this auspicious occasion that may we all realize his true nature. Thank you.
Now, Arpan Chaudhary.
Hello. Is that audible to everyone?
Yeah.
Thank you. My humble pranams to Maharaj here and sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers, and grandfathers and grandmothers. I wish you all a very good evening today. And I'd like to start with a small chant. Om Sthapakaya Dharmasya Sarva Dharma Swarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishna Te Namaha. So the subject given to me today is Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of renunciation. So often it may seem that Sri Ramakrishna's sayings are a little different from his life. But the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna is that we see the authenticity and the genuineness of his life even when we simply read his life. And however beautiful words one may speak, they can only be effective if the person himself practices and experiences what he preaches. So the main subject around which I'll be speaking today is the following. Renunciation was a central theme or aspect of Sri Ramakrishna's life. Now it's kind of an irony because everything but renunciation has been the central theme of my life so far. But jokes aside, so there's one easy way to know that, because the Holy Mother herself said this. A disciple once asked her what was the special message of Sri Ramakrishna. It's because often it may seem that, and as Vivekananda himself has pointed out, that Sri Ramakrishna was the symbol of harmony of all religions, or that he stood for the reconciliation of the different traditions even within Hinduism, as we have in the chant that I just did, Sarva Dharma Swarupina. So it's not uncommon to think that. But very surprisingly, the Holy Mother actually said that the chief idea or the chief element of Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual practices or his sadhana was his renunciation. Has anyone seen such natural renunciation? That was his great ornament. So that's the easy way to know that. And the long way to know that is trying to study his life a little more carefully, closely, and find out for ourselves. And that is what I attempted to do. And that is what I'll try to share with you over the next few minutes. And the reason what the Holy Mother said was a little bit of a surprise to me is because I realized I myself did not have a very good understanding of what renunciation is, what it really means. And I believe this exercise helped me revisit some of the key elements of this subject and expand my own understanding of the same. And I will try to share that with you over the next few minutes. So let's start with what renunciation is, what it means. So the word renunciation often scares people because it has like this negative ring to it. It can mean something negative. And as it is commonly understood, that you have to give up or stop doing all of your favorite things. Now that sounds bad, right? So like if you're a foodie, if you like to go around and explore restaurants with new food, or you like to eat ice creams and stuff, then you should probably stop doing that because it doesn't go very well with renunciation. Or like if you like watching movies and you indulge in entertainment and that kind of stuff, so you should probably stop doing that because it's not what renunciation should be, right? Although there is some truth to it, and that is what it externally may look like, but really speaking, what the idea of renunciation means is getting rid of the heavy weight of samsara, of secular life, from our shoulders and cruising through it smoothly. Now, what do I mean by that? And how do we do that? So the way we do that is by seeing reality as it is. Now let me unfold what that means. So the very basis of renunciation, according to the Vedantic principle, is that the true self is neither the body or the mind. And seeing that fact clearly is supposed to be blissful for us, theoretically speaking, because I haven't realized it myself. And we see this in the life of Sri Ramakrishna all the time. We see that he was always Ananda Swarupa. He was always blissful. And this blissfulness can be attributed directly back to his renunciation. But if you think about it, we ourselves are not so much different from these spiritual giants in terms of what we're looking for. Because I believe in our everyday life, the one thing that all of us are looking for, no matter what field we are in, no matter what we are doing, be it monks or be it like any profession, like a sports person or a musician or even general aspirants, we're all looking for this happiness, this permanent kind of happiness in our lives, whether we know it or not. And in this transactional world, in the world of Maya, happiness appears and appeals to us in a manifold shape and form, and we usually chase after it. But sooner or later, we eventually find that it did not quite satiate us, and that it was almost like a mirage. But Sri Ramakrishna points out that we need not necessarily stop searching for this happiness, but we only have to switch where we are looking for it. We only have to change the direction, change the place where we are looking for it. So then another way of thinking about this is, I'm going to read a couple of lines from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, his own words, a translation in English, which highlights how he talks about channelizing the same energy that we use every day in our everyday activities and applying that to the search for God. So then he says, God reveals himself to a bhakta or a devotee who feels drawn to him by the combined force of these three attachments. First, the attachment of a wife for her husband, the attachment of a mother for her child, and the attachment of a worldly person for his wealth or other worldly possessions. And he who longs for God with a power equaling these three put together alone finds God and sees God. So if we see this, he does not really urge us to do something different. What he's asking us to do is the same thing, but in a different way. Now, having said all this, the immediate next question is like, so where should we be looking? If we should not be looking for it in the external things, in the objects of the senses, and we should be looking for this happiness in God. We don't know where God is, really speaking. So like, where should we be looking? So again, we turn to Sri Ramakrishna for the answer, and we see that his blissfulness or his happiness did not depend on anything external, ever. Like I said earlier, he was Ananda Swarupa all the time, and that did not depend on his external circumstances. Somebody once asked Latu Maharaj, Swami Adbhutananda, that if Sri Ramakrishna was such a holy person, if he led such a pure life, why did he have to suffer from such a bad cancer? And he gave a response, but he also said that we have never seen him miserable or unhappy. He was never not in bliss. So I find it very awe-inspiring that, I mean, although people say that he was an avatar, he was an incarnation of God, so he has the caliber or the capacity to bear all such things, but still his mortal body was subject to everything that our bodies are. And I find it very awe-inspiring that a person like that, in a condition like that, back in the day when such advanced medical treatments weren't available, was able to not only not complain about his condition, but spoke only about the absolute, only about God. And we also find in this other incident where Vivekananda or Narendranath at the time stood by the bed of Sri Ramakrishna in his final days and thought to himself, if even in this condition he says that he is God, then maybe I will believe him. And Sri Ramakrishna could obviously read his mind and did say that, which finally convinced Vivekananda, as we know. It's a popular incident. So then a question naturally arises is that what is that possessing which he was able to transcend suffering, that it was almost non-existent for him? And the answer is renunciation. Although some of you may object that it was Brahma Jnana really, or the knowledge of Brahman, but the seed of that knowledge lies in renunciation. And this is what we learn from Sri Ramakrishna's life. So like, what do we gather from all this so far? Another way of saying this, and I'm actually dwelling upon each of these dimensions, these different ways of looking at renunciation one by one. And this brings up the subject of discrimination. Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka, as you all might have heard at some point. So the discrimination between the real and the unreal is renunciation. And Sri Ramakrishna says that giving up the search for happiness, which is not lasting, and looking for that instead which is real and lasting, is renunciation. It's like, true it is that the more the renunciation in a person, the happier he or she is. And this renunciation, this happiness, does not depend on something external, aka an unreal source of happiness. So like, if you look at this analytically, we find that we are only helping ourselves by doing this. We try to avoid those things which will eventually bring us pain or cause us misery. And another way of saying this is we don't desire anything that the external world has to offer us, which is a good segue into my next dimension, which is the subject of desire. Now, Sri Ramakrishna was described by those that had seen him directly as being completely devoid of any traces of desire. His desires had only to do with God, but our desires usually don't have anything to do with God. But so his desires had to do with God. And while our desires bind us, his desires did not. His was, in fact, liberating in nature. And so we find that, so it's worthwhile to dwell upon this subject of desires, because Sri Ramakrishna said that giving up those desires which impede man from realizing the truth or realizing the God is renunciation. Now, for the average person, these concepts are a little hard to understand if they don't see an actual person in whom these ideas, these principles are embodied in action. So enter Sri Ramakrishna. So then, as Muktaji mentioned earlier, that when materialism reigned in India in the 19th century, in the cities of India, the advent of Sri Ramakrishna served the purpose of re-establishing renunciation as the central theme of religion. And we can verify this from many different angles if we look at his life. I have like 3 or 4 instances which highlight this. So the first is when Sri Ramakrishna's elder brother, Ramkumar, admonished him for neglecting his education. He said that he shunned that education which would merely bring him material prosperity. And he wanted that knowledge instead, which would satisfy him forever. So now that's some real problem solving right there. In the corporate world, we do a lot of problem solving. We try to align ourselves with what we're solving for, and always keeping that in mind. Now, that is the real problem solving. So here's life, here's the problem. What will give me that solution versus what will not? And he does that. The second thing, and very importantly, is that he had completely renounced and conquered lust in every form possible. We know that he saw in all women, young or old, manifestations of the Divine Mother. And he also worshipped the Holy Mother, worshipped her ritualistically at Dakshineshwar, which sets the highest possible example of renunciation of lust. Thirdly, he had no possessions whatsoever. Whenever someone, out of reverence and respect for him, would try to make arrangements or provide for his everyday needs, he would cry out and plead with them not to bring up the subject ever again. Such was his renunciation of possessions. And the fourth is renunciation of wealth. We know the popular incident where Vivekananda and Narendranath at the time, he put a coin in Sri Ramakrishna's bed and waited for him to come back. And when he actually tried sitting on the bed, he cried out in pain. And he discovered that there was a coin under his bed. So thus, observing his master over the years, Vivekananda in the Bengali hymn that is sung every day at the Vesper service, called him Tyagi Ishwara, or supreme among the renouncers, and rightfully so. So then, this is how we see how he had completely given up all sorts of desires. And the subject of desire has very closely to do with attachment, because all desires is usually born out of attachment for the objects of the senses, objects of the world. So then that brings me to my next dimension, which is non-attachment. Non-attachment is renunciation. Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives a very beautiful illustration where of what this non-attachment should look like, what it should feel like. And he gives the example of how a person should live in the world. And he talks about a nanny or a house servant or maid servant who lives in the house of the master and looks after their children, does all the chores in the house, moves about the expensive property and everything, but knows that none of that belongs to her actually, that she's only using them for the time being, and she actually longs to go back to her real home, real family, or real children. So that is how a person should be living in the world, that you have all these different resources and everything, even your children, your job, and everything that you get to use is only for the time being. And like Muktaji mentioned earlier, that it's for the purpose of realizing God, that we see that in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, that is the sole purpose of human life, and that being able to do that is non-attachment. So then, one final thing that I would like to touch upon is the idea of purity, because I mentioned that renunciation has to do with non-attachment for the objects of the senses, objects of the world. But that attachment is born out of the attachment for this body-mind complex that we usually have. It's only because we want to keep this safe, keep this comfortable, that we look for things that will satisfy this, make this feel good. So then, which brings me to the subject of purity, which is my final dimension. So purity for Sri Ramakrishna meant freedom from the hold of lust and wealth. And those of you that have had the good fortune of reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna will know that this is an ever-recurring theme throughout the book. And the great relevance of this subject can hardly be exaggerated in the present-day society, in the present-day world. But then you wonder, what is the connection of purity to renunciation? So renunciation, as I mentioned earlier, is being as far removed as possible from the idea that we are the body or the mind. Because whatever sin or whatever misery or evil exists in the world does only at the level of the body-mind complex. Because we think we are this and we try to run after lust and wealth to make this happy. But one challenge we encounter there is that it is usually understood that yielding to instincts and impulses is the natural way of life. And purity is something that has to be developed, that has to be acquired externally through external practices or whatever it might be. But Sri Ramakrishna points out that that is not the case, actually. He says that purity is in fact the inherent nature of the true self, and it is impurity rather which has been acquired through our associations with the world, which we have to get away from. So we find that his attitude towards purity or renunciation in general is it's not a negative one, but it's a positive one. And we can also verify this from many of his sayings, one of which I'm going to say now from the Gospel, is that he says the wretch, it's a little harsh, but still, the wretched person who constantly thinks that I'm bound, only succeeds in being bound. The person who thinks day and night that I am a sinner, verily becomes a sinner. One should have the kind of faith in God that one can say, what kind of sin? I have repeated the name of Lord, and can sin still be attached to me, still cling to me? How can I be a sinner anymore? How can I be in bondage anymore? So we find that his attitude was very positive, which is a good thing for us. We can draw inspiration from that. So in conclusion, I would like to say that we learn from the life of Sri Ramakrishna that true renunciation is not really about giving up the search for sense pleasures or giving up sense pleasures, but rather it is a very natural outcome of the true kind of renunciation, which is getting away from identifying ourselves with the body or the mind, which is the true source of the problem. And also, we can look up to Sri Ramakrishna, his life, his kind of renunciation, to draw inspiration from him and get nearer to the truth every day. With that, I'd like to conclude and thank you everyone for patiently listening to me. And Om Tat Sat.
Thank you, dear Arpan and Mukta, for giving very useful thoughts on Sri Ramakrishna. As Mukta described earlier, that how Sri Ramakrishna, one has to look that it is an advent. It is not that Sri Ramakrishna was not there at any time. Sri Ramakrishna was always there. There was a very telling incident in 1936 when there was the centenary of Sri Ramakrishna was going to be celebrated. Swami Akhandananda was the president of the order at that time. And naturally, there was a radio broadcast message on this auspicious occasion by the president of the order, and they requested Akhandanandaji that please give a message. Akhandananda, he was living not at Belur Math, the headquarters, but at Sargache. He just refused. No. Why? He said, well, what do you mean? Sri Ramakrishna was there, is there, always there. Do you mean to say that before 1836 he was not there? He was there, and now also he is there. What do you celebrate? What is this centenary about? No message or anything. And then, after making several attempts to get the message from him, everybody assumed a kind of resigned attitude. Well, this old man is not going to listen. But somewhere at night, he suddenly calls his secretary. Hey, take down the message. And he gave the message. And then he explained what happened was Sri Ramakrishna came to him and said, well, what objection do you have if in my name all these devotees and my children are going to celebrate? Give the message to them. So that is the only reason he could think of Sri Ramakrishna. Otherwise is an ever-present phenomena, the divine, that is ever-present. Only appears in different forms. So that is the idea, as she mentioned, Advent. It is coming up. Like a person comes on the stage according to the role that is given to that person. So that is an advent on the stage of that person who was there before the stage show, is going to be there after the stage show. On the stage, there might be in the script a scene that he has been assassinated. Like had it been a play on Lincoln's life and he is performing a Lincoln's role, Abraham Lincoln, and then he gets assassinated. And if he actually, the person who is playing that role, thought that he is going to be assassinated, he would not come to play that role at all. But he knew that it is only on the stage. He was there before the play, he will be there after the play. And so it is just a stage advent. Advent in an appropriate form. Like somebody appearing as Lincoln has to look like Lincoln, It is, otherwise nobody would take him as Lincoln. So that is how he has to have the proper attire, proper, appearance and all that. So the incarnation for this age has to appear in that form which will be useful for this age. Useful in what? As she said, to present the ideal to the universe who has lost it. The world has lost it. And therefore, what happens here, just imagine and just visualize, that you want to go somewhere. It is climbing up a ladder. You are at one level, and then you see a ladder up to a point, and then you see ladder later on, but in between the ladder is broken. Now what can you do? You have no chance but to just remain where you are and just to, for a futile exercise, try to climb those available steps of the ladder, go up, come down. That's it. That is our life on this earth. Sometimes elation, sometimes, depression, sometimes feeling, very happy, sometimes depressed. There is always this alternating of pleasure and pain in this world. That is because we know that there is some source of pleasure, some happiness is there somewhere, and we imagine, we know that it is somewhere over the rainbow, as they say in that beautiful song, somewhere there, not here. But how to get there? The ladder is broken. And that precisely is the purpose of Advent, of the Incarnation, that he joins the ladder, stands holding the two ends as it were, and you can climb with him onwards. And that is how, his life becomes a message to us. And you can do that even now. That is why I told that what Akhandananda mentioned, that Sri Ramakrishna always is there. He is here right now also. If you just look into your own heart, He is there. He is there everywhere. We only need the eyes to see that. He is there. So, and then we can take that, hold on to that Sri Ramakrishna, that divine manifestation, and then we will see the path is very easy. And then, as Arpan was telling, renunciation is a very natural course. It is very simple, it is not that we do it all the time. Like when you climb the steps while coming from, you entered the front door and climbed the steps to come here, to come up. When to go to the next step, you had to renounce the earlier step, isn't it? No, renunciation is so difficult, then you remain there. What can you do, you say? Renunciation is, please don't get frightened by just the ring of the word, that what Arpan was telling, that it is nothing fearful about it. When you say, I am going, now a child says, I am going from kindergarten to first grade, means he has to renounce the kindergarten. No, I don't want to renounce. Then you won't go to first grade, and then there is no use of even going to kindergarten. You wouldn't have, you were better off not going there at all if you are not going to the first grade. So, exactly, friends, it is so simple. There is really what we need to renounce is, in a way you can say, if you want to condense the message, to put it in word, renounce stupidity. What, Richard, you like stupidity, eh? Okay, okay, yeah. Yeah, because we love our stupidity so much, we don't want to give up our stupidity. Just give up stupidity. That just see what is real and hold on to that, and see what is just evanescent and is going to slip away. Give up that. There is then no tension, We become free from all tensions in life, because all burden is unburdened. So it is the source of happiness. It is, we are the ocean, and yes, yet dying of the thirst. Can you imagine that? If an ocean say, I am feeling thirst, what can be done? Oh, well, you are ocean, how can you ever be thirsty? We can never be unhappy, friends, because we are happiness. We are happiness. This is the truth. And how can, therefore renunciation be difficult in any way? It is not at all difficult. Just see the truth. That's it. Give up stupidity. It is difficult only because we are not trained in doing that. So there are some training steps that, well, okay, be away, you are too attached to all these sensual pleasures. Okay, come away from that. Not that you are going to die, just come away from that and feel your freedom. You become free. I guarantee you, friends, that you will feel much more happier when you renounce in the right way. The renunciation makes us happy, not miserable. So, this is what Sri Ramakrishna has been showing through his example. And so, on this auspicious occasion, let us pray that may his example, may his presence, may his teachings keep on guiding us to achieve this goal of God realization in our own life. We all have the potential within us. God is within us. So realizing God is not something very creditable, but not realizing is just stupidity. It is, we have God here, how can we not realize it? I mean, isn't it a wonder? Not realizing God is a wonder, because God is within us. And so, let us just uncover that thing. Let us have the courage to uncover. And let us pray for that. So, thank you, friends, for attending this celebration today. It will still continue, but let me tell you the upcoming week's programs, and then we will have the closing prayer and closing song. And then there will be the 108 names of Sri Ramakrishna that will be sung. Giving, it is not exactly 108 names, but some chants describing his life and message. Very beautiful chant. So, next Sunday, oh, it is in the month of March now. Huh? Yeah. Oh, I don't have the flyer for March. March. We have to march onwards, you know. Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Wow. He is very resourceful person always.
Thank Naomi.
Thank Naomi. Yeah, but you went to Naomi. So, March 1st, the discussion will be on common questions on reincarnation. Reincarnation, I listen to so many doubts and so many questions, but they are really a very few. Others are those very questions worded differently, that's all. So we shall take up the discussion on some of these very often raised questions or doubts about reincarnation. Then classes on Tuesdays and Fridays will go on as usual at 7:30 p.m. Tuesdays the topic is Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play, and on Fridays it is stories from Srimad Bhagavatam. So you are all welcome to attend these programs as well as the daily morning and evening meditations and prayers. And a spiritual retreat is coming up on April 4th, Saturday, April 4. A very learned Swami from San Francisco, Swami Tattvamayananda, he will be coming to give the retreat, and the topic of the discussion that he has chosen is dialogues from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, a very vast Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka, and it is full of very beautiful, illuminating dialogues. So that is the topic of retreat. If you want to join the retreat, you have to register, and there is a registration fee for that. So $20 if paid early, and $30 if you want to register later, because we have a lot of money, why just so isn't it, Richard? So it is, therefore we will register later. So then you pay $30, not much. So it is now we will conclude with the closing prayers. And oh yes, there is a cello concert on 1st March, next Sunday, after the Sunday talk on reincarnation. It will be followed by the cello concert by a famous, well-known cellist, Susan Sam. So you are all welcome to attend that as well. Closing prayers, yeah. May the Divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus. Lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest itself unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we shall have closing song now, which is just a chant the name of Sri Ramakrishna. That is the theme there. Always go on singing the name of Sri Ramakrishna. So it will be displayed there. Please, you can join in singing.
सपना मना सत्य एकमेव वही यह जग सपना मना एक वही यह जग सपना मना नाम का मना सदा राम कृष्ण नाम का मना नाथ करे मोहनाश भरे हृदय में प्रकाश हरे कर्म पाश दूर करे सकल त्रास नाथ करे मोहनाश भरे हृदय में प्रकाश करे कर्म पाश दूर करे सकल त्रास उनकी कृपा दृष्टि मिटा दे समूल भव तृषामना कृपा दृष्टि मिटा दे समूल भव तृषामना कृपा दृष्टि मिटा दे समूल भव तृषामना नाम गामना सदा राम कृष्ण नाम गामना वही परम सुख निधान अकारण कर करे नत जन को परम पद प्रदान, वही परम सुख निधान, अकारण करुणावान। सहज करे नत जन को परम पद प्रदान, वही कमल चरण बना शरण, तज दे भ्रमनागना। कमल चरण बना शरण, तज दे भ्रमनागना। कमल चरण बना शरण, तज दे भ्रमनागना। नाम नामना सदा राम कृष्ण नाम गामना। लगा लगन मगन चरणन में, मगन बना नामना। लगा मगन चरणन में, मगन बना जामना। लगा लगन चरणन में, मगन बना जामना। नाम गामना सदा राम कृष्ण नाम गामना। सदा राम कृष्ण नाम गामना।
So we will now move on to Sri Ramakrishna Nama Sankirtan. Just in a couple of minutes, when this is all out of the way.